Okay, it's 6 p.m., August 28th, 2014, and time to call the special meeting of the Board of Trustees of the San Felipe Del Rio CISD to order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 in attendance, so we do have a quorum. Let the record show that a quorum of the board members are present, that this meeting has been duly called, and notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. At this time, if you'd stand for opening ceremonies. First, a moment of silence. And now the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. Okay, now that we are officially open, that brings us to, if you look on tonight's agenda, on agenda item 8, consent agenda, there are a couple of small items. There's 8F, 1, G1, and 2. It is on the consent because they're considered routine. Any questions? Anyone want to pull one to discuss? Ms. Lozano?
You said G?
Yes, under the consent agenda. F, there's one item under consent, and under G, under consent, there are 2 items. Contracts, it looks like all 3 of them.
I just had a couple questions, and I had sent communication to Dr. Rios earlier this afternoon. Just out of curiosity, I know that we've contracted with Ms. Sandoval for several years now, and I don't recognize Ms. Favela's name, so maybe we have, maybe we haven't. Wasn't sure if that's a new contract or not. But what are their credentials and qualifications for this? And are these, I mean, I know it's not a lot of money. It's not, I don't even think it needs to come to us, right?
Well, because with the agreement that I made with the board was that anything over 5,000 we would bring to you. And I can get you their specific qualifications. I don't have those. I'm sorry that I didn't catch up with today's email, but I can definitely get you a report. If it's something that you need before you approve, then I can definitely get it, and we can table it till after executive session, whatever your wishes are, Mr. President.
What would y'all like to do?
I had a question, but it's only on the funding, but it was on F. You know, that's the only other thing. I think,
Okay.
I know what these are. These are minor.
Well, okay. So, do we want to, which one was it, Ms. Lozano? It was
G1 and 2.
G1 and 2, okay. Do we want to, what we can do, if there are no questions or discussion on the other item, we could table the 2 under G. When it could be tabled until
After come out of executive session.
so somebody could get the information.
He's already gone
Oh, okay.
to get it.
Okay. You want to do that? Just postpone it till later?
I think it'd be fine after executive session.
I don't know that do we need to table it or just come back to it?
Just
Or
come back.
we'll just do it formally, that way they can get the paperwork, and when we come back, you can look at it, whatever. Okay, so.
He also had a question on
Yes.
that.
On F, the funding
Okay.
source.
So let's go ahead, and you want to talk about that before we,
Sure.
Sandra?
Good evening, sir. How are you?
How are you, sir? Just the funding source.
Okay, well, the funding source comes from our Title III bilingual and also our Title III immigrant funds, which we this year now receive for this coming school year. So we'll be using them exclusively to help all of our students who are English language learners and most recent immigrants.
Thanks.
Other questions for item F1 under the consent agenda? No? Okay, so this is what we'll do. I'm going to motion to table G1 and 2 under the consent agenda until later in the evening before we adjourn. That way we'll get the information back. So is there a second to table? Mr. Chavita has second. All in favor by a show of hands? Okay, unanimous. So we're tabling that until later on when they have more information. So that just leaves consent agenda F1. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda F1? Mr. Mesa has motioned. Is there a second? Is there a second? Mr. Chavita has second. All in favor by a show of hands? Unanimous. Okay, motion carries. Okay, so that takes us to agenda item 9, citizens to be heard. Ms. Falcone, did anyone sign up? No one signed up? Again, looking at your agenda, that brings us down to business and finance, 13. 13A under business and finance is consideration to approve the 2013-2014 final amended budgets for the general operating, debt service, and food service funds. Ms. Valdez?
Thank you, Mr. Yerovidian, Dr. Rios, board members. I have placed a packet where you're seated that looks like this. It begins with the memo from this agenda item. Okay, so tonight we will be requesting and reviewing the final amendments for the three executive or official budgets for 13-14, which is general fund, debt service, and food service. And prior to year end, we do have to approve all amendments, and in doing so, we create flexibility on our functional amendments in order to allow for the possibility of if the auditors decide to reclassify something between one functional category to the next. So that's what we'll review in our next document. So if you turn to page 5, pages 1 through 4 have all the details on the functional changes, which is a lot of detail, but but if we go to page 5, we can look at it at a summary level. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Still pretty small. The first fund that we'll review is the general fund, and we'll start off with revenue. These are the revised financials that we started generating back in January, February. So what you can see is that all of our official budgets contain the originally approved budget in the green. Whatever changes we make between one month to the next is what's in these three columns, mainly in this column, but you'll see what the changes are. So in revenue, what we're proposing is an increase in budget of $618,000. This is an increase to our prior month. But if you look at what we're proposing as the preliminary actual revenues, which is what we're proposing as our budget of $77,535,462, that's $2 million favorable to our original budget. So I'll take you through that information. That way you can see what has changed throughout the year. So what we'll start off with is on our local tax collections. We're proposing an increase of approximately $190,000, and most of that is coming in from penalty and interest. And this is just when we budget it, we just take prior year actuals and are conservative because you don't know how penalty and interest is going to come in versus when we calculate our local tax collections, we calculate it at 98%. But our penalty and interest, we take a conservative approach, and it did come in favorable to our budget, and that's why we're proposing an increase in that area of revenue. next item is tuition, 5730. We have proposed a budget of 25,000, and what we're projecting as our preliminary revenues that have been received is 54,105. What's included in tuition is driver's ed and summer school, and both of those were favorable to what we had projected in budget. The next line item is a grouping of several items, which includes interest, donations, rental, and other. In this line item is where we included the reimbursement from the appraisal district that we received, I think last week at our regular board meeting. And we also include, any surplus sales distributions that we receive from the Val Verde County. So if they have a surplus sale, they then distribute that to the taxing entities. So we have those two items included, and that's why we're showing a favorability of 91,000. Now today we also received a check from the appraisal district of 97,000. That's not in here yet, but your revenues can exceed your budget versus your expenditures not being able to exceed your budget. So we still have another potential 97,000 of revenue to be reported in general fund. In the next area, or does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry. Okay. The next area is co-curricular activity. In this budget, we include both the athletic game receipts and what we consider as an internal fund is the student transportation, when students use our yellow buses to travel either out of town or within town when it's not related to school to home transportation. So we have a chart where we set up a mileage reimbursement rate. So for example, if it's an instructional trip, it reimburses the transportation department for that use. If it's a student activity trip, those student funds reimburse, the general funds transportation department for that use. So where the favorability came in from is from that. We had budgeted at 275,000 and it came in favorable by 46,000. The budget that we set for the athletic game receipts came in almost right on target. I think only $100 favorable, but it came in right on target. Under revenue from immediate sources, we budgeted at 35,000. It came in at 66,000. This is revenue that we received from the Housing Authority, and this is revenue in lieu of it being a taxable property. Under our foundation state funds, this is where you will see the biggest favorability between original budget and our year end of what we're proposing. And that's because back in April, we had brought to you the amendment of revenue back in April for the increase in average daily attendance due to the increase in enrollment. So we had increased that revenue. Yes, sir.
May I ask a question here?
Yes, sir.
From the housing, is this the last year that we received those?
Is this the last year? It's not the last year. We've received them in the past. However, the values fluctuate, so it's not easy to set a fixed budget to it. So it's favorable to what we had budgeted.
Okay, because what I'm referring to is, when we used to send out those forms, to federally connected families and
That's
employees.
impact aid.
The federal impact.
That
We're not-
one's further down below.
Okay,
And
so that's not that
That's
from the
not
housing.
this no, sir. That the Housing Authority is under local
Okay.
local sources.
Thank you.
Any questions on the state funding? On the state funding, as I mentioned, we have brought it back in April, and where we were forecasting what our year-end average daily attendance would be at. In July, we came in with our actual average daily attendance, and so that's what we have here. That's why you see not a difference, but the movement between 5811 and 5812. That's just how the formula calculates when we plug in all our numbers. It's not. It doesn't create or change things. It's just the way the formula calculates on the template that they provide. Under other state programs, 31,000. We had received a notification early in the year that we would receive funding for pre-K, and that's for 2 years. It was just, I think it was maybe either end of September or early October, where they said, you're going to receive some funds, it's just for 2 years and it's for pre-K, and for us, it was 31,000. However, we didn't have it in our budget, so now we're just making sure we're aligning all of our revenue and our revenue budget. On TRS and behalf, this is an adjustment that we have every month as we're processing payroll. Whatever TRS expenses are generated are just simply offset with the revenue, because the TRS on behalf that's provided on behalf of the state is just to be recorded on your financials, but it's not an inflow or outflow of your revenue. Now, there's another TRS that does get posted as an expenditure, so, but this is what's considered TRS on behalf. Now, under the federal programs is where we have the impact aid, and that's where I'm showing the reduction. Of course, throughout the years when we started receiving notifications, not any definite information about our impact aid being reduced. So we reduced the budget drastically for 14-15 down to 20,000, and this year it came in at 30,000. So it was under what we had budgeted. So now we're correcting it. And then under SHARS, they have been working on increasing the reimbursements for allowable reimbursements from SHARS, and for next year we did project it to be at 800,000. Any questions on the revenue? Okay. Now, as I mentioned, this is preliminary, everything we received, and then we'll be adding the check that we received this morning, so it'll just make our revenue 97,000 more favorable. Okay. When we go down to the expenditures, of course, our original budget was at 75,442,000. Our revised budget as of July 31st was 103,758,000. That included the original committed funds that we committed back in September, and then the 25 million commitment that was done in January. So what we're doing now is we're showing the reduction of all of the committed funds from the 25 million that weren't spent, and then the reduction of what wasn't spent for what was budgeted on the committed funds. 1,828,000 is what we're reducing from what was budgeted from those committed funds outside of the 25 million. And if y'all and it is listed on the following page, page 7. But two of the biggest items was E-rate. We had committed over $1 million, and we didn't spend that. And then we also had committed almost $500,000 for litigation, and we didn't spend that. So again, that's where we're reducing the budget in order to now be aligned with our expenditures for areas that we didn't spend from the 25 million and from what we committed back in September. Now, that's why it looks so large at 27 million. We're also realigning our budget to be within at least 3% of our preliminary expenses. We have posted everything that we can think of and have some encumbrances still open for student travel that's going to occur within this next couple of days, but still in the month of August. So all of what we're trying to do here is align our, you can highlight that, our budget by functional category to be at least 3%. That's just a rule of thumb that they use, greater than what your expenses are. If the situation were to occur that during the audit you were to have an expenditure reclass between one function to the next. If that were to happen and you don't have enough funds budgeted under that function, you wouldn't pass your audit. So again, this is just trying to set up the budget to be within a reasonableness of what our expenditures are. Again, we've posted everything. We've gone through different checklists to review things to make sure everything's coded correctly. But, that possibility may exist, and so that's where we request in order to, again, to have enough flexibility. Now, we're proposing a budget of 76,636,000, but you can see this is where our preliminary expenditures are coming in at 73,215,620. And as of right now, and I'll review the favorability under the next agenda item that we'll review, but as of right now, we're looking at a favorability of 4,374,000 of revenues to expenses. And again, as I mentioned, we still haven't posted that 97,000. So it would be 4,097,000, just around there, 4,098,000. Any questions on general fund? Any questions? Okay. Then if I may, I'll continue with food service, which is, should be on page 8. Let me see if I can make this a little bit smaller. Okay. Now for food service, we are requesting an increase on the revenue budget of $357,000. Now, on the revenue side, during our audit process, our auditors identified that we hadn't been posting commodities correctly. So when we prepared the 13-14 budget, we didn't have that information. We prepared the budget, but then as they came and reviewed our financials, they mentioned that we weren't reporting commodities correctly. So in order, again, now this is to align our financials for audit, and we've finally reviewed the process, so now we are posting it correctly. Our district receives approximately 400,000 in commodities. Well, for this year, we received about 400,000 in commodities, and those commodities, as they're received, would have to be recorded as a revenue and as an expense. They would just have to be recorded somewhere, and in the past, we were only recording the inventory that we had left, so we weren't following the correct process. But this shows up as a revenue, and it shows up as an expense, so it balances itself out. But again, when we prepared the 13-14 budget, we did not have that information. So now that we're finalizing all of our financials, we have to include it, or we need to include it in order for it to be processed accordingly, appropriately. Now, when it comes to the expenses, that also is part of our expenses, and so that's why you see a large increase. But on our expenses, we had approved to have a $72,000 deficit because of the freezer. Based on what our revenues and our expenditures are coming in at, we are actually going to exceed that $72,000 deficit by another $65,121. We have, over the summer, started looking at the food service account in a lot more detail. We did notice some areas where the revenue wasn't following trends, so we need to work on that, but we did come up with a plan in order to identify all of those either areas that we're not meeting our revenue in, or areas where we can reduce expenses so that we do not come across the situation next year. So for example, we had discussed about creating a student group in order to increase our participation. We really do need to increase our participation in order to increase our revenues. We also need to come up with more creative ideas, and one of the ideas that somebody had shared with us was a grab and go, which would be an allowable reimbursable, breakfast, where it would be available to students at more convenient locations to increase your breakfast participation. Another thing that, as throughout the year, we're working with different audits for the food service program, they had identified that we were generating what they would say inefficiencies on wasting some of our food. For instance, we were producing too much. So we really need to work on that and doing a analysis by campus in order to start aligning those expenses. Another area was, for instance, we have a high participation in breakfast in the classroom, and usually we produce enough for every student, but sometimes those parents don't, some parents are opting out of the program, but not opting out with letting food service know, so we're still we're still processing the food, and then the student's not eating. So again, we're just gonna tie up all of the areas where we can identify any kind of efficiencies and reduce waste in the program. But but continue to do an analysis by campus, so. And also, another thing that we've been working on is to improve the campus ordering process. Right now, they order everything by paper. So they write everything down, send it in, and do their inventory on paper, which creates also, an increase of your inventory days that you maintain. So there's a lot of things that we started looking at. As we've mentioned before, the expenses are going to increase on our food, so we need to be able to be very creative to make sure that this fund stays as a self-funded fund. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Mesa?
Are we still encouraging the students to fill out a lunch application
Yes, sir.
in all campuses, pretty much?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
This year, we increased the number of kids that filled out a lunch application, and the idea behind it was, Mr. Casillas was driving that because we wanted to get most of our campuses qualified for E-rate. And to qualify for E-rate, you have to have, what was the percentage, Mr. Casillas? 74.5 minimum, and this year we were able to qualify Lonnie Green, which didn't qualify before, and Del Rio Middle School. Unfortunately, high school's too big, and we just couldn't get there. So, and the freshman campus. So this year we increased the number of kids that were identified for reimbursable meals. There are some issues that we were discussing earlier with the fund balance that hadn't come in the red before. And there are some things that we need to look at to make sure that we are able to stay in the red, and we think that, we can address that. And if after some checks and balances over the next couple of months, if we think we need to hire somebody to come do an efficiency study, then we'll certainly move in that direction. Because we increased the reimbursable, the meals for the free and reduced, for the paid lunches, because we had the breakfast in the classroom, I really was not expecting for this fund to come in the red. It is a big surprise. So we'll be sure to monitor every month the activity that goes on, as well as control the use of substitutes as we move forward, because these are all expenses that are generated. So we'll probably bring a report back in the next couple of months just to see how we're doing in income versus expenses.
Right, and that, as Dr. Rios, that was another area where we identified that they weren't following the correct process to call in substitutes. You call them in when there's a vacancy, and they were being called in on a daily basis just to assist with daily activities. So, again, there's just a lot of additional monitoring, but, we really hope to increase our participation with our students and create menus where all those students like. So we're really hoping to go a lot more positive with this also.
Just a comment, since you said that you're hoping to create food that more students would like. Is that something, at least from the high school, Dr. Rios, that you will hope to get feedback from the Student Advisory Council?
Yes, ma'am.
That was, yeah.
Great, thank you.
And also at the high school, oh, I'm sorry, sir.
Wisconsin, I'm glad you brought that out. Because remember during our budget meetings, I brought up the question about what was it that we were throwing a lot of food, a lot of people the kids are not eating their food. Is there any way we can control them by maybe getting something that they like? And I'm glad that Mrs. Fallon brought it up, because it's important. I don't know how we can do it, but except maybe by asking the kids what is it they like, or the cafeteria monitoring what is it that we don't throw in all their food, where something needs to be done. Because we spend a lot of money and the kids are not eating it. So I would prefer that we spend the money on something that the kids will like.
And also, just to add on the applications, it is part of the one-to-one process at the high school and freshmen. So whenever you in order for you to pick up your laptop, you would have to turn in that form as well as other forms that were included in the packet. So,
That's a good way of getting it.
and generating revenue in other areas, yes. Any other questions on food service? And their fund balance at year end was $991,843 when we started this year, so end of last year. So we still have a healthy fund balance. The next report is debt service. This is it's also referred to as interest and sinking, and this is the fund that we use in order to pay our outstanding debt. And that is on page 9. Now, in this report, our revenue that we had calculated, of course, based on our property tax rates and based on our state funding, we're not proposing any changes. That's still in line with what we're projecting. And on our expenditures, there are some changes. This is mainly due to the refinancing. And we refinanced our 2005 note that, of course, created some activity to be posted. So, for example, if you look at the principal and interest at the beginning of the year, trying to look at it here. Okay, I'm sorry. We were looking at $4,400,000 when you look at principal and interest, these two right here. Now, when we refinanced our note, we saved in the 13-14 year about $104,000 from that principal and interest. Now, throughout the year, in order to be able to post the activity from refinancing the note, we also had to post the fees that were incurred, which are listed right here, $224,000. Along with reducing our principal and interest. Along with reducing our principal and interest and including the refinancing fees, we also had to recalculate our outstanding debt, which means you would eliminate your original note and include your new note, and in order to reduce your debt, and you would have a more favorable fund balance. So our projected favorability is our projected favorability is $131,994 for our debt service fund. Again, we're requesting an increase of $114,000 in the budget, only to align with the activity that needed to post with our refinancing. But total projected favorability, and I can't highlight it right now, is $131,994. Are there any questions? And on the refinancing, the total projected savings per year was going to be around $184,000 compared to if we had stayed with our existing 2005 note. And we did see that in our 14-15, and that's where we reduced the tax rate. Are there any questions? Again, in summary, these are the requests for the functional changes between general fund, food service, and debt service. This is to align our budget within our functional categories to be within the projected expenses, or to have room or flexibility if the auditors were to request an adjustment. Now, on debt service, we only have one function, so there won't be any reclassifications there. On food service, the majority of our functional expenses are in function 35, but again, we needed to align our budget to be in line with our expenses. But in general fund is where we use that rule of thumb to at least have a 3% budget above what our preliminary expenses are if the situation were to exist that we had to reclass an expenditure. Are there any questions on the final amendments for the 13-14 year on general fund, debt service, and food service?
Questions, Mr. Mesa?
I think the only one is, with that check that you received today, so we should be seeing that when? The addition of 97,000.
We will see all of our final revenue and expenditures when we present the audit. It will be posted, but on your revenues, you can exceed your budget. On your expenditures, you can't.
Right.
But yes, it will be shown in our audit where we will have all our final audit entries, if there's any changes from the audit, and we'll have that audit report. We usually present it in December.
Okay.
auditors come in October, and by then we'd have to be done. But again, between October and November, they can make recommendations for changes. But once we're ready, we've completed it, we can send a summary out to the board to let you know where we're at, pending the auditor's review.
Thanks. Yes, ma'am.
Other questions? Any other questions?
Okay, then if I may read the recommendation. It is a recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the 2013-2014 final amended budgets, which include general fund, debt service fund, and food service fund.
Heard the recommendation, is there a motion to accept? Mr. Chavita has motion, Mr. Mesa has second, all in favor by a show of hands? Unanimous, motion carries.
Thank you.
It brings us to agenda item 13B, consideration to approve a resolution to commit the fund balance of the general fund.
Okay. On page 10 is where the information starts for our commitments. Page 11 is a resolution, but I will discuss all the details before we start reading the resolution. But this is a template that we have from TASBO to follow GASB 54. So I'd like to start off with, we just reviewed budget and we discussed our favorability on our actuals. And on page 12, you have what would be preliminary financials for our audits, where you have it compared to prior audit years. And we also have the budget that was approved for 14-15. Now, in the area that's in blue, as I mentioned, we're looking at approximately $4 million favorability. And again, that still doesn't include the $97,000 that we received this morning. So we're looking at $4,097,000. But taking the favorability of the revenue, the increase in revenue that we have, plus the expenditures that we generated, again, we are looking at a favorability of approximately $4 million. Applying that favorability to our beginning of the year fund balance, which was $49,458,432, would take us to a revised fund balance of $53,458,807. We then will review in detail all of the commitments that we have listed to show an unassigned fund balance of $25,533,506, which, when you look at the prior year, it is an increase to the unassigned fund balance. But if you will turn, and I'll come back and look at that detail, so if you can turn to the next page, we'll start off with the commitments from the Citizens Committee, the construction and renovation projects, the $25 million. We have all the projects listed here to show the total $25 million. And we also have the expenditures that were incurred this year by project. So in total of the $25 million, in the 13-14 year, we spent $431,968. Now, in your monthly financials, we were including a report that was listing out this information on a monthly basis. That way, everybody could monitor how and what was being spent by project. So we were including that on a monthly basis. So we have $431,968, and in order to, as we had mentioned before, we knew we weren't going to spend all the $25 million in 1 year, and we mentioned before that at this August meeting is where we were going to recommit what hadn't been spent in order to continue with the projects, and that's what we have here. We have everything listed for a total of $24,568,032. Now, as we mentioned last year during the commitment process, this is a commitment. However, we will return as the projects are ready to be presented and request approval for those budgets to be added before any spending occurs. So, again, we did discuss that last year. And then throughout every month included in your financials, you can see the status of those projects. Are there any questions on the Citizens Committee construction construction list projects.
Questions? Mr. Mesa?
So, I guess, Dr. Rios, we have 1.4 in contingency, just in case, from that 25 million?
1.8, it's
1.8?
listed down at the bottom, yes.
Yes, sir. And that's, we haven't assigned that.
Right, just in case we run over,
Well, in case we run over, for example, in
most recent.
in the most recent presentation, we had one of the projects that would exceed the money, and we will recommend reducing construction in other areas, and also have the option of dipping into that 1.8. Obviously, that won't be our recommendation, but that is an option that the
Okay.
board can choose to take.
Okay, thanks.
But really, that only comes into play if construction were to follow the exact pace of that money, right? I mean, contingency is if the whole thing is in play at once.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And it's not, because
Right,
we're doing
yeah.
it a little
No,
bit.
just for clarification, I mean, it'd be like if everything was ongoing and committed. Bless you. You got choked up when I said all the money. It's the finance department.
Any questions on the 24 million? And again, like I mentioned, we will be providing a summary every month included in your financials, and we have been, I believe, since about April, that listed every project, the budget for every project, and what was either spent or encumbered. So these were your actual expenses for these projects. Okay. The next area, we have facility projects. Thank you, Ceci. On page 13, we continue with facility projects, and I'm sorry, I just noticed that the total cut off into the next page. But these are facility projects for $1 million. We have been using the favorabilities from our year ends in order to commit construction or facility improvement projects. And this year, again, we have $1 million on the request, which includes the shade canopies at the elementaries, Annex 3 security office renovations, patch and seal work at Buena Vista and Calderon, paving overlay at Chavita, fencing at the Del Rio Freshman School, and covered walkway at the Del Rio Freshman School. It also includes renovations to Annex 1, a football field concrete slab at Del Rio Middle School, bleachers at San Felipe Memorial Middle School, and a landscape and sidewalk project to continue at Del Rio Freshman, HVAC replacements at Del Rio High School, Freshman Buena Vista, fencing and gate improvements at Del Rio High School, improve the unpaved Del Rio High School student parking lot, at Freshman and Del Rio High School intercom systems, ROTC commercial sink and disposal, concrete paving at the driveway for the transportation department, HVAC to install a new HVAC at the Del Rio High School, and at the Del Rio High School old gym bleacher replacements. And that adds up to $1 million, and carried on to the next page. Any questions on those requests?
I just have one question. It's just curiosity.
Yeah,
How old
Mr.
are those?
Salinas is here.
How old are those bleachers at the high school, old gym?
The original.
They're pretty steep. They're pretty dangerous.
So that was
Both camps.
68 in there.
Thank you.
On page 14, if I may continue, on page 14, included in the budget process, we ask all the budget managers to share requests of needs for their departments that exceed what can be purchased within their budgets. And as we receive that list, we identify the priorities, and based on year-end favorability and what we can achieve, we then put this list together in order for those items, again, that can't be afforded within their regular budgets to be purchased. So for what we call capital or special requests, and again, this is part of the budget process, everybody has the same opportunity to submit a request. It's included, the sheet is included in everybody's budget package. We have Security Department vehicle request, Transportation Department, 3 buses. This is just to continue with the fleet replacement. A vehicle in the Transportation Department, a vehicle lift, I'm so sorry, vehicle lift. The Maintenance Department requested window blinds for Dr. Lonnie Green, and 2 vehicles, one for a welder and the electrician. There's also a request to have a hold for furniture for the Del Rio Middle School conversion to the Student Activity Center and administration. The Technology Department requested servers. And as we have previously discussed on E-rate, which is tied into our free and reduced lunch application, E-rate is no longer funding infrastructure, but they're funding wireless. So in the past, we were requesting a commitment of over $1 million. If we were to be funded by E-rate, that would be what we would have to match. So now that they're only doing wireless, that commitment has gone down to approximately $355,000. But we're still trying to commit for E-rate and hopefully get funded. For the one-to-one initiative, Targus cases, which are the safety cases if students, in order to prevent the tablets from being damaged if they're dropped. At the CNI department, computers for their labs, which is where they do most of the staff development in the district. For our improvement required campus, we're also requesting to set aside funds. And then the following 3 are purchase orders that were generated in the 13-14 school year where we did not receive either the service completed or the items or the project in the 13-14 year. So we're requesting to recommit those funds in 14-15, which is the demographic services. That PO was approved back in June. They'll be completed in September. DRV attendance audit. He said he should be completing that in the next couple of weeks. And then we had initially started with the retaining walls at the Del Rio, with the landscaping at the Del Rio Freshman to include the retaining walls, but they were not able to start on this project. So in total, for capital and special requests, we have $1,361,785.
Is it a car or a truck?
Are there any questions?
I was just curious, that's an expensive vehicle for the security department. Is that a truck perhaps?
No. Am I correct? That's a vehicle, it's an actual car. Is that correct?
He had listed a truck, and he had actually listed 4 vehicles, so I don't know which one would this relate to, Dr. Rios.
That's a lot, isn't it?
I think by once you add all the extra equipment.
But I can certainly follow up
No,
and
it's
provide
just,
that information.
And really, like Mike said, he requested, I think it was 3 vehicles that he requested, but we were only able to fund 1. On the maintenance department, also it says 2 vehicles, but that one would only cover 1. Am I correct, Mike?
That's correct.
it's like, that's what I was comparing it to. It was like, that's
Yeah, no, it's just 1.
fancy car versus.
Oh, under maintenance, it was just 1? I'm so sorry, and I put 2.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll make sure to correct that.
And that's to hire an electrician? Is that what that means, or?
No.
No, it would
Oh,
be
it's
a-
to support them, I mean, their vehicle.
that
Okay.
trade, yes. So internally, we'll decide whether for the welding or for the electrician, since we only get 1.
And then one final question. On furniture for conversion of the old Del Rio Middle School to the Student Activity Center and administration, you're not buying new furniture for administration? Isn't that gonna come when you move to the new place, or no?
Well, yes, ma'am. The current plan that the architect developed had a line item there for furniture. We put it here. That would help us get in line on the budget that you all allotted, and it would go with the purchasing. We don't have to keep it here. We can just keep it with a assigned 25 million. But because the CTE building has a potential to come a little bit above budget, and we did come in very favorable this year on the budget, we wanted to balance it out. Again, we could assign it to the 25 million, but we'd kind of like to stay as much as possible within that budget. I just want to be clear that the items that are listed here, there was a whole lot of items that were listed. But we can only fund some of them and prioritize some of them, and the priority was done by the cabinet after we reviewed everything. And unfortunately, we couldn't cover everything we needed to. But this is definitely a step in the right direction.
Dr. Rios, I know you said you had a longer list. Were there any requests from the engineering robotics folks for a special, I don't know what they're called, those really expensive design?
Is that part of the list for career tech?
They submitted a list, and with their increase in funding, they're able to afford it within their budget.
Okay.
I don't know I don't recall everything that's on their list, but they had about 7 different capital requests, but they could afford it within their budget.
Okay. Thank you. I just know they have to share a piece of equipment with 3 different departments, and it gets to be pretty tough for them.
Of the items that we didn't move forward with, I don't remember anything coming from that area. The one that and I'll mention it just so that we can think about it for next year. Our ROTC program is a very large program, has a lot of students in it, and they've needed the resurfacing of their marching pad for a long time. But that in itself is a large project. We're not able to do it this year, but hopefully at this time next year, we'll be able to do that.
Isn't it on there?
No, they had a sink that we're adding.
They have a commercial sink and disposal.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mesa?
I guess, Dr. Rios, as we replace the fleet of transportation buses with new buses, are we trying to salvage or whatever we can from the older buses that we have? Are we selling those?
No, sir. Mr. Salinas can correct me, but we keep a reserve fleet that we use for when we have to do repairs, and then I think a few of them are used for parts.
Okay.
But we don't sell unless they're just very old and no.
Yes, after we go through that process at the very, very end, many, many years after they become second fleet, we do auction them off.
Whatever's left?
Yes.
Just as, I guess it relates to, we don't want to have a junkyard, that like forever and ever.
Yes, sir.
That's whatever can be sold and money generated and put back in the funds.
I believe it was 2 years ago that we had included buses in our surplus sale. We have one more item on the list, and this isn't an exact amount, just a projection, but this is for salary back pay. Again, this is just a projection and based on what our 13-14 back pay was, and the number that may still exist, it's at $433,050. Again, these are commitments for the items that we will move forward with. We will bring at the September board meeting, and the other items will just stay on commitments until we can get started with those.
I'd like to elaborate on the salary back pay.
Dr. Rios wants to add something.
I just want to elaborate on that salary back pay. The board will remember we worked through our attorneys earlier to give the back pay to our teachers who were once instructional aides and give them the service year credit. At that time, because the study was so extensive and we had to go through each individual file, it took a lot of man hours. We took the summer off to focus on the hiring process. So now we have to go back and review the employees that separated from the district that are still entitled, and we have had just a couple come in. I asked Dr. McNamara and the HR department to review the people who had separated from the district, and we came up with 1 year, a study of 1 year, the people that separated this last year. Using the average amount that we paid to each teacher and the number of teachers that separated this last year, we multiplied it by the years that remain for us to study. And that's why we're coming with this amount. We think that because Ms. Valdez and her department are running a tighter budget every year, I didn't want to just assume that we could take it out of this year's budget. So I asked Anna kindly to set some money aside so that we can go back and pay them and not affect the local budget. But it is gonna take us another month to month and a half to finish that study, because it is people that have separated, and it is an extensive part. So for anybody that separated and that is entitled to it, just know that it will take another 45 days at a minimum to complete the study and bring it to the board for action.
I just have a question as it pertains to that salary back pay. Are we going to have an expiration date of when we will continue to pay? Somebody show up 5 years later and say, okay? I'm just curious.
Our intention is to identify everyone that would qualify for the pay, send them a letter, and have that money set aside. And if after the first year, we only pay $300,000 of the $433 that we set aside, pretending that's the exact amount that we have to pay, then we would come and ask the board to recommit that same amount of funds the following year in case anybody came up. And then after 2-3 years, if the people that we contacted have stepped forward, then at that point we would stop recommitting the money. So that's our plan.
Mr. Mesa?
I think that's very favorable that, you know, you are trying to at least make contact with them. Now, granted, we have no idea, you know, about mobility, if they move from district to district, but I think the fact that we are trying to at least locate them says something about our district. You know, it's our mistake, and it's unfortunate, but they're entitled to that money. So I'm glad you're doing that.
In total, for commitments, what we're proposing is $27,362,866. And if you go back to page 12, that's where we've taken that information, plus where we have to reserve what we have in inventory for the warehouse. And this is not the food service warehouse, but our non-food warehouse. It's included in here as well. Again, we're projecting a favorability of about $4 million, which would take us to a fund balance of $53,458,000, less our commitments that we've proposed, which includes also the warehouse inventory, would be an unassigned fund balance of $25,533,506.95. Again, this is an increase to what our unassigned fund balance was last year, and with this new budget for 14-15 of $79,883,201, what we would calculate as a 3-month fund balance would be approximately, I thought I had it written down, but $19 million. So we're $19,970,800. So we're still well above the 3-month minimum fund balance, which is 25%, and this 25 million is actually 32% of our 14-15 budget.
You anticipated my question.
I'm sorry, sir. Oh,
You
really?
already got it. I had my hand up.
Oh, I didn't
Straight
see you.
to
I'm
it.
sorry,
That's
but I'm glad
okay.
I answered it.
Yeah, it was the 3 months versus what the unrestricted.
Okay. Now, on the optimum fund balance, which is something that we're required to be within, that's why last year, again, we went through this process to commit 25 million to be within an optimum fund balance. The 25 million does allow us to be within the optimum fund acceptable, where we would receive, our full points on our first rating. Are there any questions there? And then I can start taking you through the resolution.
Any questions?
GASB 54, again, was introduced June 2010. I'm sorry, in 2009 for financial statements that are presented after June 2010. And it requires that it reflects information of reserving, when you reserve or commit, I should use the word commit, it used to be reserved, when you commit your fund balance. It also, this is something new to us, but something we've been practicing. It also asks that you include what you would consider as a sufficient or minimum fund balance. And as we've previously discussed or been practicing, is that we've always compared it to 3 months. So here what is listed is just that we have discussed that our goal is to have a minimum 3-month fund balance. And as you just saw in the other financial report, we are at 32%, which is well above the 25%, which would be the minimum. But the resolution includes the information we just reviewed, which is $24,568,032 for what we call construction projects from the Citizens Committee report, $1 million for our facility projects, $1,361,785 for capital or special request projects, and then $433,050 for salary back pay to be in compliance with TAC section 153.1021. Are there any questions?
Questions?
And if I may, I'll read the recommendation. It is the recommendation, I'm sorry.
Does anybody just want to take a minute and read through the resolution? Are you ready for the recommendation?
She was going through it.
Okay, and the recommendation.
Okay, it is the recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees approve the resolution committing the fund balance of the general operating fund.
For the recommendation, is there a motion to accept?
I so move.
Mr. Chavita has motioned. Is there a second? Mr. Mesa has second. All in favor by a show of hands? Unanimous, motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we move further into the agenda, Dr. Rios just notified me that the information, I think that Ms. Lozano and maybe one other board member wanted under, or related to consent item 8G 1 and 2, which we tabled just an hour or so ago, saying we'd bring it back before we adjourn. That information's ready, correct? So if it pleases the board, we can hear that and vote on it and move on. Do you have it?
I'll have it.
So this is under the consent G, 1, consideration approved contract with Monica Sandoval in the annual amount of $7,200.
Monica Sandoval came up through our ranks. She was our captain when she was here with us in the Flag Corps. She doesn't have any formal education in that area, but she has gone through the Winter Garden competitions and workshops for the expertise. Her amount is a little higher just because it goes on through competition. The students not only perform at football games in UIL, but they also have their own Flag Corps competitions. Those are her qualifications. And Ms. Favela, she actually studied, she attended the Colegio de Danzas to learn the traditional dances of Mexico. So she has formal study in that area.
Is she, is this her first year? Do you remember?
I don't believe so.
I believe that Ballet Folklorico, this is her first year, and Mrs.
Is that a new, it's not a new program.
Sandoval has been with us for a couple of years.
Miss who?
The Flag Corps has been with us for
Oh,
a
yes.
couple of years. But am I correct in saying that, Mrs. Ballet Folklorico?
They've both been there
Oh,
for
okay.
more than 3 years.
Both of them. But you said both?
Both of them, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that extra information.
Other questions? So are we good with this item to vote on it. He did cover both G1 and 2, so, under agenda item 8, consent agenda, item G1, consideration of approved contract with Monica Sandoval in the estimated annual amount of $7,200 for color guard dance routines, and 2, consideration of approved contract with Monica Favela in the estimated annual amount of $5,400 for ballet folklorico dance routines. Is there a motion to accept? Mr. Mesa has motion. Is there a second? Ms. Haynes has second. All in favor by a show of hands? Unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so now back to where we just finished. A few moments ago, we finished agenda item 13A and B. So that brings us nothing under 14, nothing under 15. That brings us to agenda item 16, closed session. It is now 7:08 p.m., August 28th, 2014, and the Board of Trustees will recess this open session and convene a closed meeting in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, Subchapter D and E. We're able to do that under 551.071, 551.072, 551.073, 551.074, 551.076, 551.082, 551.084, and specifically tonight pursuant to 551.074, discussion of personnel or to hear complaints against personnel. 1, discussion of personnel report to include the following: new hires, district vacancies, retirements, resignations, and 2, discussion of salary adjustments to include the following justifications: matrix salary adjustment, service credit, master's degree. All final votes, actions, or decisions will be taken in open session. We're now in closed session. Okay, it's now 8:28 p.m., August 28, 2014, and the Board of Trustees will reconvene in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, Subchapter D and E. No action was taken in closed session. So now that we are reconvened into open session, that brings us to agenda item 17. A being consideration to approve the personnel report to include following: new hires, vacancies, retirements, resignations. Dr. Rios, I guess you're doing this one.
Yes, sir. Mr. Garabedian, members of the board, the administration recommends Fernanda de los Santos, second grade teacher at Dr. Lonnie Green Elementary. We recommend for migrant advocate, Mrs. Stella Zaragoza. Also for migrant advocate, Mr. Roberto Zaragoza, Mr. Ramiro Ramon, Ms. Sylvia Cardenas, Mr. Ricardo Guajardo, and we further recommend the reassignment of Mr. Ramon Menchaca from Del Rio High School attendance officer to migrant advocate.
For the recommendation, is there a motion to accept? Mr. Chavita has motion, Ms. Lozano has second. All in favor by a show of hands? Unanimous, motion carries. Agenda item 17B, consideration to approve salary adjustments to include the following justifications.
Mr. Garabedian, members of the board, we recommend that you accept the one salary adjustment as discussed in executive session, closed session.
Is there a motion to accept? Mr. Chavita has motioned. Is there a second? Ms. Lozano has second. All in favor by a show of hands? Unanimous, motion carries. Nothing under agenda item 18, so that brings us to 19. Being no further business before this board, is there a motion to adjourn? Ms. Haynes has motion, Mr. Chavita has second. All in favor by a show of hands? And it's unanimous, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.